Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be in Singapore and at this conference. First of all, I should apologise for my strong English accent. I come from a city in the UK, Wolverhampton, which is famous for having the accent that makes you sound the most stupid. So, I'm going to try and give a perspective on Altmetrics from an Altmetrics researcher point of view. So I'm going to try and give an overview of Altmetrics from the perspective of someone who wants to research Altmetrics and assess the value of different types of Altmetric for research evaluation. So, the starting point for Altmetrics really, I think, is citations. So Altmetrics are alternative indicators. So what are they the alternative to? Well, mainly they're the alternative to citation counts. So for most researchers wanting numbers to help them evaluate research or reflect some kind of the impact of research, then citations would be the first starting point. So something like the journal impact factor is widely used, or citation counts to individual publications, or even citation counts to researchers or universities, departments. So citations are the starting point. And many people have said for a long time citations are not very good, are not perfect for this perspective. So I think they're quite highly valued in Singapore, particularly, but they're not perfect. So why aren't they perfect? There are a number of reasons why they aren't perfect. So these include the fact that as researchers, that the purpose of our research isn't just to help future research. And if you help future research, you'll get citations from that future research. That's fine, but that's not the only reason to do research. Research ultimately is supposed to help society, to help business, to help health, to help government. The point of research is really to help society, and counting citations doesn't tell you whether your research has helped society or not. So Altmetrics have the potential to be a way of reflecting the help of research for society rather than for other scholars. So citations don't directly reflect commercial impact, societal impact, so Altmetrics might provide an alternative for that. Also, citations are not very good for arts and humanities type research, especially citations from journal articles don't really tell you much at all about arts and humanities researchers, because arts and humanities researchers don't publish many journal articles, and they use citations in a different way to the science and social sciences. And also, a lot of research gets used in education, but that doesn't translate into a citation. So if you've written a book which is widely used in classrooms, you might not get many citations for that book, but it's still a useful book. And another important limitation of citations is that they're very slow to accumulate. So if you're doing research today, then maybe you'll finish research sometime in the next year, you'll write up the paper, you'll submit it to a journal, maybe in 2 years' time your article will have been refereed, improved, accepted to be published in the journal, and in another year's time you'll find that you start to get your first citation. So it might be 3 years between doing the research and the first citation appearing. So this is fine for me. I'm really old. I don't care about a delay of a few years. But if you're a PhD student, that means that you won't get your first citations until after you've applied for the job that you want. So citations are useless to you. In fact, they're worse than useless, because when you apply for a job, if they want to know about citations, almost all PhD students will be saying, well, I haven't got any at all yet. So if they're lucky, they've had a paper published, but it won't have picked up, probably won't have picked up a first citation. So slow citation is really a big problem for younger researchers. And it's also a problem for governments and funding agencies that apply policy to groups of researchers, because if you're a funding agency or a government and you change something about research, then you want to know as soon as possible what the impact of that change is. So, for example, the Wellcome Trust, who started the Altmetrics, helped to start the Altmetrics conference, they changed the way they funded research a couple of years ago, and they wanted to know, is the new way we fund research producing better research or not? So the way they wanted to evaluate that was to see if the new funded research was being more cited than the old funded research. So with a citation analysis approach, you'd have to wait probably 3 or 4 years to find that out. So that's 3 or 4 years of a policy which might be the wrong policy. But with Altmetrics, you can do that after about 2 years. So you get earlier evidence of impact from Altmetrics. Okay, so this is the selling point for Altmetrics, but I'm not going to claim that Altmetrics solves all the problems of citation analysis, because it doesn't. So some examples of alternative indicators. So for educational impact, if you do work that has educational impact, then there are syllabus mention indicators, or download counts is another good indicator if you have a high educational impact for your research. If it's widely used in education, it will be downloaded a lot. For societal interest or public engagement, which is what the UK government is most interested in for Altmetrics, we have things like Twitter, blog citations, web mentions, but these are really, I think, the weakest Altmetrics at the moment. We don't really have good evidence of the value of these. For arts and humanities impact, we can have Google book citations, so citations from books instead of journal articles, and some other sources of arts and humanities impact. For health impact, we have some alternative indicators that can point to specifically health impacts. So clinical guideline citations is my favourite one. So if your research has been cited in a government official document that tells the doctors what to do in the country, then you can use that to claim that your research directly affects how people receive healthcare. So you're having a direct impact on health. Organisational impact is another useful one, which you can assess to some extent by looking for grey literature that's like your research, that won't be in the traditional citation indexes. And commercial impact, to some extent, patent citations we can use. So there are different indicators for different types of impact. None of them perfect, but they have been developed and they have been tested to some extent. And for early impact, we have Mendeley read accounts as a really good one that I'll talk more about later. So disadvantages of alternative indicators. So the main disadvantage is that they're almost all easy to manipulate. So if the government says you're going to fund your research based on how many tweets you get, then it would be a good idea to pay someone to tweet your research all day, every day, for the rest of your life. And it won't be very expensive, so it's easy to do. So, and most of the other alternative indicators, you can also pay people to change, or you can even change yourself. You can add extra values to your publications. So they're not good for evaluations that are really important, and where the people that are being evaluated know about it in advance. So the British government asked a committee to assess Altmetrics for use in the official evaluation of the UK, and the committee said no, we can't use any Altmetrics for the official evaluation because British academics will cheat. So maybe in your country your academics won't cheat, but in the UK we will cheat. And we'll really cheat as much as possible to get the money. So, and also accidental manipulation. So Twitter, for example, if you have a publication that you've written that you're really proud of, maybe you will tweet about it, maybe you'll even persuade your friends to tweet about it, and that's great. That's really good. So giving your research publicity is really good. But if you then count tweets to evaluate the impact of research, then you're really assessing people's publicity and not the impact that the research has had on other people. So it's not deliberate manipulation, but it's accidental manipulation, or not even manipulation, but accidental changes to the results. And also for Twitter, articles sometimes get tweeted a lot just because they have a funny name. So in the early days of Twitter, all the top articles, some of the top articles seem to be ones that had funny names, not so much anymore. When I look at the Altmetric list of the top articles now, they all look to be really good research in terms of tweets. And finally, for alternative indicators, they're based on the evidence that you can find on the web for impact. So people that don't use the web don't get registered. So you don't get, you don't find all types of impacts, but you get impact evidence that's biased towards younger users that are more likely to use the web, users in richer countries that are more likely to be online, and users that like computers and are more likely to put stuff on the social web. So it is a biased subset of users. So you do have to be careful with alternative indicators. Okay, so how do we check whether an alternative indicator is useful or not, given that the theory says it might be useful, but there are limitations with alternative indicators. So the main academic approach that's been used to test indicators so far is to check to see if they correlate with citation counts. So this is a strange one, because we want alternative indicators to be alternatives to citation counts. So why do we check to see if they're similar to citation counts? So it's kind of a stupid thing to do. But it's useful because, first of all, if you get a statistically significant correlation, it at least shows you that your data is not random. So for some alternative indicators, you might get close to random data. So for Twitter, it often looks like random data. So a positive correlation shows that the alternative indicator isn't random, and it relates to scholarly communication in some way. So you're not looking at data which relates to something completely different. So publicity rather than impact of any type. And also it gives you evidence about how similar the two indicators are. So for one of the indicators, one of the alternative indicators, the evidence suggests that it's more or less the same as citation counts. The correlations are always high, moderate or high. So this alternative indicator, Mendeley reader counts, is almost the same as citation counts. And also it would be strange if you had an alternative indicator that didn't correlate with citation counts but was a useful impact indicator, because if you do research that has impact anywhere, then you would expect it to be followed up by other academic research. So you would expect it to get some citations because it had educational impact or commercial impact or some other type of impact. So there might not be a strong correlation, but there should be a positive correlation between any type of valuable impact and citation counts. So, for Mendeley readers, I'll just go over some of the evidence, just very briefly, without boring you with the numbers. But for Mendeley read accounts, and Mendeley is a social reference sharing site that you can use to register all the articles that you're reading or plan to read. And if you look at the record for an article in Mendeley, it will tell you how many other people have registered that article as something that they have read or plan to read. So Mendeley is the second most common altmetric compared behind Twitter. Twitter is the most common, Mendeley is second. And citation counts correlate moderately or strongly with Mendeley read accounts in virtually all fields of science. So if you check the 323 odd Scopus field categories for science, in over 95% of them there's a moderate or strong correlation between Mendeley read accounts and citation counts. So it's almost universal for science that read accounts correlate with citation counts. So these are just a few examples. But Mendeley read accounts occur about a year before citation counts. So if you want citations but you want the evidence earlier, then Mendeley read accounts, not citation counts. So if you're a PhD student and you're applying for a job, then you probably find your citation counts are 0, but if your article's been published, even if it was published this week, you might have your first Mendeley reader. So you can report Mendeley readers rather than citation counts for applying for a job. So Mendeley read accounts are really good. Twitter, the evidence is that the number of tweets for an article has a really low correlation with the citation counts for an article. So it's not, it doesn't give strong evidence of value, and other approaches such as content analysis of tweets suggest that tweets are not really used. First of all, tweets are not evidence of public engagement with research, because tweets about research tend to be written by researchers and not the public, except in health to some extent. And secondly, tweets about research tend to be not discussing the research, but just announcing the fact that an article has been published. So it doesn't really give you evidence of impact from Twitter. So tweets have been a really disappointing source of alternative impact evidence. And we haven't really found any other indicator which gives good evidence of societal impact, although things that are like tweets, like Facebook wall posts and Google Plus, can also give some weak evidence of interest in articles. So for health impacts, as I mentioned before, citations from clinical guidelines are a good source of evidence that your research has directly translated into public health improvements. And F1000 is a site that gives post-publication peer review to articles, and if the peer review of your article after it's been published says that your article has had an impact on a clinical practice, then you can use that as evidence that you've had public health improvement impact from your research. So F1000 gives a label saying change the clinical practice, which you can use for health impact for your research. So for arts and humanities impacts, so if your work is mainly books or journal articles in the arts and humanities, then Google Book citations give you a better source of citation counts than Scopus or the Web of Science, because they're citations from books and not citations from journal articles. And if you write humanities, arts and humanities type research, you're more likely to be cited in books than in journal articles. Another good one is library holdings. So if you count the number of libraries that hold your book, then that is evidence of impact for your book. It doesn't have to be cited, but if your book's in lots of different libraries, then that's evidence that is useful. And online book reviews are another source of evidence. So in the humanities, when you apply for a job, you might be asked to report the reviews of your book, not just the book you've written, but list the reviews of your book. And you can get this from lots of online sources now. And there are now alternative scholarly impact sources like Google Scholar, Microsoft Academic, the new Dimensions.ai website released this week, and ResearchGate that will give you earlier citation counts than Google Scholar and the Web of Science. So if you're applying for a job and you need to report the citation counts, then you can use these sources to get citation evidence where the numbers should be a little bit higher than Web of Science and Scholar, Google Scholar, Web of Science and Scopus for recently published articles. So for commercial impact, really, I think the only good indicator we have is patent citations. So if your research helps industry, then it might be cited in a patent. So industry, a business might create a patent and then cite your research. But it's very rare to get academic research cited in patents. So in biochemistry, about 10% of articles, journal articles, are cited in patents, but in most other fields, less than 1% of articles are cited in patents. But this is the only evidence we have of commercial value for academic research. And educational impact is probably my favourite indicator. So for educational impact, you can search in Google to see if anyone's mentioned your article in their syllabus, in an academic syllabus. So you can just Google the title of your article and add the keyword syllabus to the Google search, and that will be a search for documents that contain the word syllabus and your article title. And there's a good chance that these will be syllabuses that include your article in the reading list, or book, article or book in the reading list of a course. So this is a fun one to use because you can manually filter out the incorrect matches and then just look for syllabuses that mentioned your research. Okay, so evidence summary. So in terms of evidence, in terms of empirical evidence for the value of alternative indicators, Mendeley has by far the strongest evidence. So for virtually all fields, Mendeley is a citation-like indicator of impact. So the biggest disadvantage of Mendeley is that it doesn't reflect anything that's not scholarly impact, really. It reflects a little bit of education impact, but it's a citation-like impact indicator, but it's a year earlier than citation counts. And then Twitter is the most common alternative indicator, but also the weakest in terms of we don't really know what it reflects, and you get high numbers with Twitter, but it doesn't give you strong evidence of any particular type of impact. And all the other alternative indicators that we've looked at are much less common than Twitter. They're less common than Twitter, and they correlate much more weakly with citation counts, so they can be used in some contexts. So if you're a PhD student and you're applying for a job, then what can you make of all these alternative indicators? So one thing you can do is go to an Altmetric data provider and find your articles in the website of that Altmetric data provider, like for example altmetric.com. You find your article in their website, and then you'll see a little badge telling you how many tweets you've got, how many blog posts you've got, how many of all the different types of indicator score you've got, and then you don't have to check all the different altmetrics for your article. You get them all in one place, and you can pick the ones that give you the high scores. Okay, so for individual researchers using Altmetrics, so my recommendation would be because the evidence isn't strong that they reflect any kind of impact except for Mendeley citation impact, then I think my recommendation is that you write your explanation about about the impact that you have, and then use the Altmetrics to back up your explanation, so that your core evidence is your narrative, your cover letter for if you're applying for a job, or your bio if you're writing your website description, and then you use your alternative indicators to support the case for the value of the research that you've done. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Prof. Thelwall, for that inspiring speech and all the evidence and the advice. So we have time for a few questions.
Thanks, Mike. In your research, have you actually looked at creative works? We have colleagues in the art school. They could be doing, their works can involve, exhibitions, curation, and so on. How would you actually, help them to support their work in terms of the impact? Have you studied that?
Yes, that's the trickiest one that we've ever looked at. So I did an evaluation for the Belgian government of the Belgian music school, and they had exactly that problem. And so the Belgian music school, like most music schools, has music researchers and musicians. And the musicians, they don't even write publications. They produce nothing. They just go to concerts and they play concerts. But if you're a musician, that is research. So someone going to a concert and playing some music is doing research if you're a musician, just like painting is doing research if you're an artist. So the solution we came up with for them was, it's the impact of the person, not the impact of their output. So for the musicians, we counted how often they were mentioned on the web, and then we used a content analysis of the context in which they were mentioned. And then we compared the Belgian music school to the British music school, and we asked them, tell us your 5 competitors. 5 music schools that are similar to you that you want to be compared to. And then we did the same for all the different music schools. And that seemed to work a little bit.
My name is Tim, and I'm a student here. I just want to ask about the tweets. You mentioned the tweets Twitter is very weak. However, tweets are the highest, they have the most common Altmetrics indicator. However, there's no evidence that they have an impact. So if I'm interested in finding out whether tweets really cannot demonstrate the impact of the articles, then what kind of thing should I look into? For example, because the tweets currently there's no evidence that there's strong evidence, so should we give up entirely in investigating into tweets? Or if I still want to try investigating tweets to show that tweets actually can demonstrate an impact?
I think for tweets, the problem is that there are many tweets given for publicity reasons from the journal. So depending on which journal you publish in, you might automatically get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tweets from that journal, from the editor or the publishers tweeting about it. So I think to make tweets useful, we'd have to have methods to filter out the tweets that are automatically generated by publishers, probably even the tweets that are generated by the authors for self-publicity purposes. And I think that's quite a